It was the number heard round the region back in 2015 and frequently repeated on this show and in many other spaces since. The median net wealth of Black Americans living in Boston, just $8, compared with nearly $250,000 for white households. That's what was published in the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston report, making clear the inequality that has long persisted in a region teeming with opportunity for some. Now, local leaders are taking a much deeper look at this divide, the root causes and potential solutions, not just in Boston, but across the state and among other groups. I'm joined by two of the people behind that expanded effort, Nicole Obi, the Chief Executive of Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, BECMA, and Prabal Chakrabarti, Executive Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Welcome to both of you. Good to see you both.
Great to be here.
You know, Nicole, you're quoted in the Globe saying that the study in 2015 kicked off a racial awakening in Boston. But it seems to me, while there was a ton of talk about this, there was much less action than talk. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
I think that the results are mixed. I think that the awakening was real. I think some folks used that as the impetus to get about making change, while others weren't necessarily sure what to do. And there were some that didn't mean anything to them at all.
Prabal, I didn't realize how small the sample size was today. And I don't think you were involved in the actual research, but you were in the presentation. Do you worry at all that the divide may not be as egregious as portrayed because the sample size was so small? Or are you confident in those 2015 numbers?
The original Color of Wealth study found what many national studies have found, a really stark divide between blacks and whites in terms of wealth. If you focus sort of on the absolute number, it's on the order of a couple 100,000. And so we're very confident that that steep divide is there and that it very likely remains. With a new study, we hope to say more, not just about the steepness of the divide, but about some of the sources and in particular point a direction. I think Nicole is absolutely right. This study was a flare that went up, that launched many efforts, many sort of ships, if you will. Our hope is that this new study provides more of a compass, more of a direction, that it expands to the region, Massachusetts as a whole. Mm-hmm. And so we look forward to taking on this effort.
Prabal, I want to stay with you for a second. I had a couple of leaders of Latino groups here a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about your study. And I was amazed then as I expressed them, and I was at the time. If we can put up these numbers, while practically everybody watching these shows has internalized and memorized the 250,000 versus 8 number, almost no one spoke about zero wealth dollars for a Dominican family, a mere $3,000 for a Puerto Rican family. Do you have any insight into why those numbers, by the way, in the fastest growing population, the Latino population in Boston, why they were second thoughts, if thoughts at all?
Well, I'd say that the real power of that study and of this new look that we're taking at it is really being able to look at ethnic and sub-ethnic groups in much more detail. It's interesting you mentioned those figures. There are also a lot of information in that study that pointed to the use of sort of availability of savings products, retirement accounts, home ownership, the role of debt, student loans and car loans. Looking at these numbers with a more comprehensive and an expanded effort to look across the region, we do hope to say more about key demographic groups, and again to say more about the sources. Wealth is incredibly important in the Latino population, Black population, Asian population, certain sub ethnic groups within Asians. It's incredibly important to allow people to participate in the labor market. The ability to borrow for a student loan to get a higher paying job.
Let me be clear, I wasn't faulting the Federal Reserve. You put out the numbers. I was faulting people like me who chose not to focus on those while we were focused
Yes.
pretty intensely. You know, one of the other Globe interviews you did, Nicole, I hope you don't think I'm stalking your interviews, but your first interview with the Globe after you got the job at BECMA, you talked about how important ownership was. And I looked back at those home ownership numbers in 2015. White families, almost 80% home ownership. Blacks, less than less than a third. Dominicans, again, a fifth or less. So we do know, even without the new research, that the absence of home ownership in families of color is a central pillar of this inequity. Is that not so, Nicole?
Yes, absolutely. That is the case. And that has its roots in systemic racism and redlining and these issues that have been going on for generations. And that's the result of it. The system has worked as it was designed to work. And that's what it looks like when it works well.
You know, you mentioned, Prabal, a minute ago, student loans. Ayanna Pressley, the congresswoman, was on our radio show today. She had something to say about that very topic and about inequity. Here's the congresswoman.
20 years after Black borrowers took out loans, they still owe 95% of their loan. White borrowers owe 6%. Now, that's not because those Black borrowers were not gainfully employed and weren't working hard and trying to, it's about the layered generational sort of policy violence of everything from a wage gap, the racial wealth gap, and all of those things add up. So this is a racial justice issue.
Prabal, do you agree with the congresswoman's analysis?
I think Congresswoman Pressley is asking the right questions. I think that student loans, as I mentioned earlier, key toward being able to get the education and training to get a higher paying job, participate in the labor market. I think it's a complicated question. I think one of the things that the survey and more extensive work will shed more light on the extent and nature of the issue, and also point a direction on how to address not just the issue of student loans, but sort of the underlying factors, the lack of access to wealth that drives people to take on those loans.
I want one last political question for you, Nicole, and I hope this is a decent analogy. We were all stunned that Sandy Hook provoked no action at all, essentially, on guns on the federal level. If I can analogize, these $250,000 date dollar thing is incredibly stark. And with all due respect to your first thought, it didn't provoke nearly the amount of response and action that I think the numbers merited. Do you worry, if that didn't do it, that no matter how comprehensive this next 2.0 study is, that we're going to be stuck in the same morass?
I do worry to some degree, Jim, but I also know that there are changes that are happening and that there are people who are in decision-making roles that are helping to move us further, and that the next study, which we're happy to be a part of and welcome the opportunity to get to some of these root cause issues, will be helpful in many ways, in many realms.
I hope it is. Nicole, Prabal, good to meet you both. Good luck with your work. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.